Okay, good afternoon and welcome back to your second day of remote learning. Today's activities are going to be a brief overview of Congress, which is the unit we are moving into for the next few weeks, whether it be remote learning or whether it be in-person cohort style. Either way, it will be delivered through video and the internet. So if you have questions, obviously, please use the chat or unmute your microphone as we're going through. But this, again, is just kind of a basic synopsis of Congress and how it works, the differences between the two houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, respectively. So we're going to be kind of glossing through that a little bit here today. It won't take an exceptionally long time, and then I'll give you time to work on the assignment associated with this before the time is out during the fifth bell time slot, if you will. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. You will notice on your Google Classroom page that you have a congressional PowerPoint, which is what I'm going to use here in a second. You have your Zoom meeting from yesterday. If you were absent and unable to attend, it's there to watch. This is the House v. Senate is the Desmos activity we're going to be working on here shortly. And this was the classwork from yesterday's session. So this actually goes along with the Zoom meeting, if you will. Okay, so move that down here. That way they're at least paired up. So if you were to click on the congressional PowerPoint and it'll open it up within slides, you would see this. I'll be presenting it, so you don't need to do that on your end by any stretch, but it's there for your own understanding here as we go through, your own reference, if you will. We're talking about the legislative branch, specifically Congress, okay? Legislative branch, if you remember from our congressional unit talking about the three branches, this is the branch that makes the laws, okay? So LM, this is how I always try and remember it. Executive enforces, okay? So EE, executive enforces. Judicial interprets, so I and J closely together, so they tell you what the laws mean. And then the legislative makes, okay? Legislative branch makes the law. And these two houses of Congress work in conjunction with in order to get that done. So the legislative branch in Congress is split up again into two houses, okay? And here's the kind of point of, and I'm going to get through the little. Okay, there we go. These are what are known as the enumerated powers. Now, when we went over the Constitution, we talked about how Article 1, okay, the first article of the 7 articles in the Constitution sets up the legislative branch, and it's the most specific. They go on for much longer in the legislative branch in Article 1 than any other branch or any other function of government. And just as a review, the 7 articles, first is legislative, second is the executive branch, third article is the judicial branch. Then they talk about federalism, the breaking of the government into national and state local level in Article 4. Article 5 is the supremacy power, Article 5 is the amending power, where they talk about how you can actually change the Constitution. Article 6 is the supremacy power. Excuse me. Article 6 is the supremacy power, which basically says the national government reigns supreme over any state or local law. We'll talk about that later on in the course. And Article 7 is the ratification process, which pretty much as soon as we ratified the document, it pretty much became moot. The only time it's ever used is in ratification of an amendment, which we'll get to later on. But bottom line is, the one they took the most time on was Article 1, and you can tell because it's much longer than any of the other articles. Now, the enumerated powers are the ones they actually wrote in the document. So they enumerated or stated within the document that the Congress has the power to tax or spend money. As much as Donald Trump or now Joe Biden can say, hey, I want to spend money on, Donald Trump, for example, said, hey, I want to spend money on a wall. A border wall is fine and good. That's what if that's what he wants to do, that's great. He can lay out a vision of what he wants to do, but Congress is the one that actually has to allocate the money. So if Congress says no, then he can't build a wall, which is basically what has happened for 4 years. He had a vision of building this massive border wall down along the border between the United States and Mexico. And while some parts of the wall that were already existing got an upgrade, and while he did build a little bit of new fencing, if you will, there's really no wall per se. And it's because he didn't get the money. Because Congress said no, because he tried to allocate money on his own right and was blocked by the courts. There is no wall. So Donald Trump learned a lesson in separation of powers. That if one branch of the government says we're not going to do it, the other one can't. So as much as he wanted the wall, it didn't happen because Congress said no, specifically the House of Representatives, which has what is known as the power of the purse. Okay, they decide whether or not they're going to tax or spend because these are the people in the House that have been directly elected by the people. They have been elected by, they kind of represent the people most directly. Okay, so the Senate can write bills that ask for money or funding, but the House is the one that really has to okay that. If the House says no to the funding, then it doesn't happen. They also regulate interstate commerce. So interstate commerce is the idea that, trade and how, different states trade, how the Ohio trades with Michigan. If they have a border dispute, if they have trade between the two states, that is handled by Congress, according to the Constitution. Laws concerning copyrights, patents, weights, measures, and bankruptcy are all handled by Congress. So copyrights, if you write a book, or if you sing a song and you want to make sure nobody copies that and makes money off of your work, you can get a copyright on that. Patents are you invent something, you tweak something to make it better, more efficient. If you want to get a patent, you have that right, but you have to go through Congress to do that. Weights and measures, they're the ones that decide what, how much something weighs, how much something is measured. It's all handled by the government, specifically through Congress, and of course, bankruptcy as well. Admitting new states, if Puerto Rico, for example, wants to become the 51st state, they have to go to Congress to ask for that, and Congress would have to enact that type of legislation for that to happen. If you want to declare war, that can only happen through Congress. Congress is the only one that can declare war. If they want to print money, run a post office, if they want to impeach, which again, Donald Trump experienced this, so did Bill Clinton, so did Andrew Johnson. Those are the only three presidents in American history that have ever been impeached. Now, that does not mean removed from office. That is part of the process of it. If you ever wanted to do that, no president, even out of those three that have been impeached, no president has ever been thrown out of office. Nixon was the closest to that, but he resigned before he ever was impeached or processed at all. He is still the only president to ever remove himself, resign from office. But again, impeachment literally just means to formally bring up on charges. So they formally charged Donald Trump with a crime back a few years ago. That was when the impeachment debate was going on, but the Senate did not come through with a conviction. Same thing happened to Bill Clinton. Same thing happened to Andrew Johnson. All three of them were put on trial in the Senate, and the Senate still did not remove them from office. So they also have removal power, but they've never used it. Creating a federal judiciary, they have the right to do that. They did that literally right as soon as they ratified the Constitution. So they have the right to do that, and the implied powers are put on top of that. They basically explain in the Article 1, in the expressed powers or enumerated powers, they also explain how implied powers work. This is the idea that if something is related to what is said in this listing here, and the list is a little bit longer than this, but if it's related to these powers that are expressed, if you can stretch the document, okay, this is what is known as the elastic clause or the necessary and proper clause. If you can say, hey, in order to do one of these things, whether it be taxation, whether it be commerce, whether it be printing money, if you could theoretically attach something to that and say, if I stretch it out a little bit, it's related to that, then they're basically saying Congress has the right to do that. So to put that into modern day terms, Obamacare. You will notice that the Affordable Care Act, which extended health care benefits to people that did not have it through government-run health care, is there anything in the expressed powers that says that Congress has the right to do anything with health care at the national level? The answer is no. There's nothing that says they have the right to do that directly. but is it related to something? Is it closely related? Could you argue that providing healthcare through the government is a way of regulating interstate commerce? Could you make an argument that it is related to taxation? Yes, you could, and that was literally part of a Supreme Court case where Chief Justice John Roberts, who was a Bush appointee and considered to be conservative, actually saved Obamacare from being overturned as unconstitutional by saying Obamacare counted as a form of taxation. So since the Affordable Care Act had taxation involved, Roberts said it was related to that and therefore was allowed to stay. Now, Obamacare is up for reevaluation again by the Supreme Court. There are other parts of it that are being challenged. So we'll see if that is the way that they still view it. But the idea here is if the Affordable Care Act is related to some provision within Article 1, then it is allowed to stay. And it, again, comes down to, is it constitutional? So it depends on who you ask, of course, but that's how implied powers work. Are they related enough to where you could say, yeah, I could see how they're related, and I could see how you could stretch the document to cover that. Now, there are two parts to Congress. Again, like we said, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives is the larger body. There are 435 members of the House of Representatives. The Senate is 100. Why? Because 435 members of the House of Representatives represent congressional districts within states based upon population of those states. Some states have multiple, quite a few representatives in Congress. Like Ohio, we have 16. But every state has 2 senators, regardless of size, regardless of population. Every state has 2 senators. Some states actually have more senators than they do congressmen. A state like Wyoming, a state like Alaska, which are huge. They're massive states, but they don't have a large population. So comparative to, let's say, California, which is the most populous state that has 53 representatives, Alaska still only has 1 because their population is very small comparative to the rest of the United States. Okay, so that's kind of how that is apportioned out. We'll kind of talk about that here in a second. Now, the constitutional differences between the two are pretty striking. First of all, in the House, which again is the larger of the 2 bodies, 435 members, as I said, which is proportional representation, they serve a 2-year term. So your representative, a guy named Steve Chabot, he serves every 2 years. So that's why you're kind of used to seeing the name Chabot every election cycle that you have every 2 years, because he constantly is running. All your life, he has been your representative. Okay, he has been there for quite some time. I take that back. There was a 2-year term he wasn't there. He was beat by a guy named Steve Driehaus when you were very, very young. But for the vast majority of your life, Steve Chabot has been your representative in Congress. So that brings up another thing, that there is no such thing as a term limit in Congress. You can serve there for as long as you want. As long as you are reelected, you can keep going back as many times as you want, which has been a bone of contention and something people have discussed. But again, House of Representatives is a 2-year term, whereas the Senate is a 6-year term. The old joke within Washington, D.C. is that the Senate is the senior circuit, that it's the older member of the Congress. Why senators tend to be a little bit older. Now, that's not a constitutional difference. That's just a realistic difference. And how do we know that? Look at the leadership. If you look at Mitch McConnell, he's very old. You know, he's been there for quite some time. He just got elected to his 6th term. So he's and you're talking about a 6-year term. He's been there for 36 years and growing. So you're talking about somebody that has been in the Senate for almost as long as I've been alive, and I'm ancient. So bottom line is, Mitch McConnell's been there a long time. Now, he's not the only one. There have been people there that are there for 40 or 50 years, if not more. Again, it's whether or not the state keeps sending them back. Okay, the House, again, tends to be a little younger because there's just so much turnover. The idea is, are you really going to serve in the House over and over and over again if you are constantly running for re-election? That can get tiring. That can get a little rough over time. It's an easier way, or an easier House to see a turnover of representatives. Okay, now the House, as I said before, initiates all money bills. So if you're going to spend or you're going to tax, it has to start in the House. Because again, proportional representation, they are based upon the population voting them in. So they're directly responsible to the people. Whereas the Senate has more of an advice and consent on appointments and treaties. So instead of them handling the money, they're the ones that are kind of handling the power brokers. So for example, right now, Joe Biden is making his transition into the White House. When he takes the oath of office, the very first thing he's going to have to do is submit his list of appointments to his cabinet, to his national advisors, his on the economy, on diplomacy. So he's got all these government offices, and even in many cases, judicial appointments as well, that he's got to put forward, and the Senate has to decide whether or not these people are going to take the job. The Senate gets that right under the Constitution. The House does not. So the House does not have to interview people that are going to serve as possibly Secretary of State or Secretary of Education or Secretary of Housing and Human Services. None of that is going to go through the House. It all goes through the Senate. So the most public of all that, a few months ago, or about a month ago, really, when Amy Coney Barrett was up for the Supreme Court, the Senate was the one that was deciding whether or not she was going to take the 9th spot on the Supreme Court. The president nominates, the Senate decides whether or not they stay. Okay, whether or not they get the job. So the nomination is the president, the actual approval of them is the Senate. The House initiates impeachment proceedings. The Senate is the actual trial. So the House basically does all the investigating and all of the basically accruing of information. And then, believe it or not, there's House members that then go to the Senate and present the case. So they're kind of like the prosecuting attorney when they go to the Senate. This is what happened when Donald Trump was put up for impeachment. When the House voted to impeach, it meant that a guy named Adam Schiff, who was head of the Judicial Committee in the House, along with a number of other, a guy named Nadler, Jerry Nadler, and Nancy Pelosi, who is the Speaker of the House, all these Democrats went to the Senate to present their findings from the impeachment inquiry, and then the Senate had to weigh whether or not it was enough to remove him from office. Now, again, you remember they did not find him guilty, so therefore he was not removed from office. So again, the Senate kind of decides one way or another about whether or not this person deserves to be kicked out of office or whatever else. They never have, but the Senate is the one that does that according to the Constitution. Operational differences in the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is a little bit more centralized and structured. You're not going to deviate from the schedule very much. The schedule is set by the Rules Committee, headed by the Speaker of the House. So if they say that this bill is going to be voted on Friday at noon, that is when the vote is going to occur. And if you're late, that's on you. You know, you're going to miss the vote per se. If they're going to debate it, they actually set up like, all right, House debate's going to be from Wednesday at noon till Friday at 10 a.m. And they're going to, since there's 435 members, they're going to kind of piece and parcel out maybe 5 to 10 minutes 5 to 10 minute windows for you to actually get up to the lectern and talk about it, especially if it's a really, really important bill or a very controversial bill. They'll say you've got 5 minutes on Thursday afternoon at 3:45. And that is your time if you're a representative in Congress to go make your case. And again, if you miss it, if you're late, they just pass you over. You don't get to just walk in and talk because it's just very rigidly scheduled. Whereas in the Senate, it's less centralized. The rules are a little bit more lenient because it's kind of, like I said, the senior circuit. There's only 100 of them. They get more time. It's kind of a relaxed rule. There's no Speaker of the House. There's only a majority leader. We'll kind of get to that here in a second, but it's much more relaxed in the Senate, shall we say. Whereas in the House of Representatives that has strong leadership because of that centralized and structured schedule, the Senate doesn't have that. The Senate, it has kind of a loose association. Even though Mitch McConnell holds a tremendous amount of sway as the majority leader, it's not like he's up there banging the gavel and running the show on a day-to-day basis. Technically, it's the vice president. He may not show up, and most of the time they don't. Okay, back in the day when Washington was president and Adams was the vice president, Adams would show up to the Senate every day and run the debate. In modern day, the vice president no longer does that. They find it exceptionally boring because they can't even talk. All they can do is recognize other people to speak. So literally, let's say Mike Pence decided he was going to go to the Senate. His only function is to vote in the event of a tie, which has happened, but doesn't happen very often. If he was there every day, what happens if a Democrat stands up and just starts blasting the president, blasting Mike Pence, saying nasty things? Pence can't even defend himself. He's not allowed to talk because he is not a vocal member of the Senate. So he would have to just sit there and take it. So most of these vice presidents just decide not to go. They leave that to a guy named the president pro tempore, which is the longest serving member of the majority party. It's basically a formality. Most of the time, the president pro tempore just nominates somebody else. Like, I don't feel like doing it today, so Senator so-and-so from Alabama is going to go do it. So they just kind of make somebody else go do it for them. It's a nice job if you can get it. When they say germane amendments only, that means the House of Representatives, if you're going to amend a bill, it has to be related to what the bill is about. You can't just throw some random stuff on there. Whereas in the Senate, you can throw whatever you want on there. Again, very loose. House of Representatives, they have specialized committees that are very, very specific in what they are studying. The Senate, again, a little bit more relaxed, whereas in the Senate, you have a filibuster. So when I said everything is rigidly timed and scheduled in the House, the Senate, you can get up and start talking for as long as you want about anything. And we'll kind of go over filibusters later on as we go through Congress a little bit more and talk about the Senate more specifically. But the filibuster is kind of a way of protesting as a senator, and it can be a little fun, and it can also be a little crazy as well. And again, what is a filibuster? It's a way for a senator basically to attempt to block or delay the passage of a bill or a Senate action. So let's say you're a senator, you don't like a bill that's coming through, you don't like, let's say you're a Democrat and Trump writes this bill and it's being passed through and you really don't want it to happen. You can stand up and start talking about it and hold the floor for as long as you possibly can. If you can hold the floor long enough, maybe the other party says, all right, well, what do you want? What amendments can we add that would make this bill okay for you to just kind of let it go to a vote? So it's a negotiating tactic more than anything else. The record for a filibuster was 24 hours roughly by a guy named Strom Thurmond back in 1957 when he was trying to hold up a civil rights bill. He spoke for 24 hours against the civil rights bill. He was a Southern at the time, he was a Southern Democrat. He would later change over to the Republican Party later, all because of civil rights. He was from South Carolina. He was very much in favor of segregation and Jim Crow laws. And the Civil Rights Act of 1957 was definitely going to strike down some of those Jim Crow laws. So he wanted to basically hold out and try and amend it to where it wasn't going to get rid of all of the Jim Crow statutes that were involved in that civil rights bill. In 1957, if you remember from your history classes, that's when the Little Rock Nine were going to school in Arkansas. They were trying to go to school in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's when they were truly trying to desegregate the schools after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling in 1954. That was when they were doing the Freedom Riders. They were, they had just had the Montgomery bus boycott. So it was a supercharged issue at the time. But Strom Thurmond was on the wrong side of history with that. He may hold the record of the filibuster, but it's not exactly the thing you want in the history books next to your name. Cloture vote is the idea that if you have 2/3 of the members of the Senate vote to limit the time of a filibuster, you can actually kind of get around a filibuster. So when you're doing a filibuster, you probably should have friends. You probably should have people in the Senate that are supporting you, because otherwise they're just going to vote to shut you up through cloture. Now, organizational congressional leadership positions, you have the Speaker of the House, which is just a House position. There's no Speaker of the Senate, no such thing. So Nancy Pelosi, who holds that currently in the House of Representatives, is the most powerful member of the House of Representatives. She runs the show. She controls debate. She controls the schedule. She controls what bills come up and in what order, what committees are going to meet and when. So she really does have a tremendous amount of power within the House. Both houses, the House and the Senate, have majority and minority leaders. The majority leader, of course, is part of the party that has the majority, obviously the most representatives. So in the House, it would be Democrats have a majority leader. In the House, it's Republicans. Republicans have a minority leader. Okay. In the Senate, it's flipped. Okay. Right now, as it stands, the Senate is run by the Republicans. So Mitch McConnell is the majority leader in the Senate, whereas the minority leader is a guy named Chuck Schumer from New York, who is the minority leader for the Democrats in the Senate. Each party has a whip, majority or minority whip. These are people that basically help out with the leadership of the political party within both the House and the Senate. As I said before, in the Senate, there's a president pro tempore. He's the one that kind of runs the day-to-day operations as best he can. But again, the Senate is very loose. There's no such thing as a president pro tempore in the Senate. And then, of course, the vice president, like I was saying before, presides over the Senate. But most of the time in modern society, they only show up if there's a tie vote. Okay, the most obvious one that comes to mind recently was when Donald Trump first took over as president. There was some questions as to whether or not his education secretary was going to pass through Congress. A woman by the name of Betsy DeVos. There was a lot of criticism about her, whether or not she was qualified, and even the things that were on her resume were a little anti-public school education. So there were a number of people that were standing against her appointment. It ended up being a 50-50 tie in the Senate over whether or not Betsy DeVos was going to be the Secretary of Education. Mike Pence showed up that day and cast the deciding vote, so Betsy DeVos became the Secretary of Education. Again, that's one of the few times that actually occurred in recent memory where there was a 50-50 vote where Mike Pence had to show up. There were others as well. That's just the one that's coming to mind right now. But like I said, Mike Pence being at the Senate is a very rare occurrence. It's only for really ties and when he's swearing in new members. And that will be Kamala Harris's job come January 20th. So Kamala Harris will actually step into that role in January, and then she will be the one that will have to show up in the event of a tie, which right now there are 50 Republican senators and 48 Democrats. Georgia still has 2 Senate positions that are up for a runoff. They had to have a runoff election because it was too close. Georgia will settle that within the next few weeks here, and when Georgia settles that, we'll decide whether or not the Democrats or the Republicans hold the majority. If both Democrats win, it's a 50-50 tie. And because Harris is a Democrat and going to be vice president, then technically speaking, the Democrats would be the majority party. But if just one of the Republicans retains their seat from Georgia, then the Republicans would remain the majority, whether it be 51 or 52 votes within the Senate. Okay, so the Senate's going to be very close. It's going to be very close, 50-50 tie on most things. So Harris might actually show up to the Senate quite often. Okay, that's the basic rundown. How do we elect members of Congress? We've talked about this before with reapportionment, the idea that states are drawn into districts and vote for their state representatives. State legislatures draw the districts every 10 years after the census. We have just held a census, so we will be using that data here within the next couple of years to redraw district lines in the state of Ohio once we reapportion how many districts we'll need based upon population of the overall United States. Now, we talked a little bit about this before. Gerrymandering happens, and gerrymandering is the idea that you draw the district lines to suit your needs. So basically, you know, let's say a Republican governor comes in and says, all right, well, I've got 3 districts, and all 3 of them on the surface, the way they are, all 3 of them are 50-50 splits. But if I draw the lines creatively enough, I can make sure that 2 of those districts are Republican and 1 is overwhelmingly Democrat. So instead of it being a 50-50 split, I have a 2/3 split Republicans getting the majority. So that's kind of where that comes from. It's an illegal thing to do, but it's very hard to prove that that's what they were doing. Ohio has since switched. This will be the first time that we use our new system. The new system is that 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, I think it's 3 on each side, will sit down and actually draw the map together. This is supposed to theoretically stop gerrymandering from occurring. But bottom line, that's how we end up with these members of Congress. Okay. Anyway, on your Google Classroom page, now that I'm done with that, you have this assignment right here called House versus Senate. This is a Desmos activity. Most of the time you're using this for your math class, but we are using this as a method of kind of doing an organizational strategy. Now, when you click on the link, it's going to take you to Desmos. Okay. You're going to type in your full name. Okay. So I can use this for grading. So please type in your full name. Okay. And when you click go, it's going to take you to this activity right here. You will notice that there is the U.S. House of Representatives. Okay. There is the United States Senate. Okay. All these things slide around, what are known as cards. What I'm going to ask you to do is create columns. Okay. And what you're going to do is you're going to arrange these cards underneath the proper things. So which one has 435 members? I'll give you this one. It is the House of Representatives. Okay. So the U.S. House of Representatives has 435 members. And you notice if I slide the card onto this, it's going to start, giving me a list, if you will. So therefore, who has 100 members? The Senate. Okay. What I'm going to ask you to do is arrange the cards on this Desmos activity to show that you understand which of these cards fits with each one. Now you have the video that I just did, and of course you have the PowerPoint slideshow for reference to help you out with this. And of course you can use Google to search up some of this stuff, but this is the activity that you have for today. This is the activity that will also have your extra credit put on it for attending today. So please make sure that you complete this. Now completing this is quite simple. When you get done sliding all these cards into the appropriate slots and creating, a list, and it needs to be accurate, when you're done, it's not going to let you hit next or anything. Okay. It literally will freeze the last screen that you're on. So once you're done moving all the cards and you have everything in the columns as you see fit, then you're done. You can literally exit it out. When I go to grade, the last screen that you had, the last screenshot is exactly what I will see when I go to grade. So don't worry about saving or hitting next or anything like that. Once you're completed with the activity, that's it. You don't have to worry about anything else. All right. Stop sharing here. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Just making sure I've got, I assume, Woody, I assume you are Mr. Chapman. All right. Checked everybody else off. Abby, I'm assuming you're Miss McNett. I know Lainey is Miss Vogelsong. Leo, I need your last name, please. Other than that, you guys are all good. You have this Desmos activity that is due, so please make sure that you work on that either today or sometime this week. There will be an assignment tomorrow. You do not have this style of class tomorrow. This was just kind of an experiment going on to see if we could actually get this done. So I do appreciate you coming in for these classes and helping us with this experiment so that I can properly kind of debrief this with the administration here at the end of the day. So you don't have this 7-bell schedule tomorrow. We go back to full remote tomorrow. I am not sure if we're going back on Monday or not. They kind of said they're going to let us know Thursday what the plan is moving forward based around what the health department tells us and based around our local COVID rates. And quite honestly, whether or not the staff is healthy enough to come back in. Okay. So, bottom line is, folks, we're not sure kind of what we're going to look like next Monday, whether or not we're going to continue with this full remote stuff. We're not sure if we're going to come back to this 7-bell day style of teaching. We're not sure where we're headed at this point. We apologize, but with the COVID realities right now, that's kind of where we're at. So what I can tell you for this week, you obviously have the Desmos activity that I just showed you what I want you to do with that, and it shouldn't take you very long. If you were paying attention and you use the PowerPoint as a reference point, you should get through it fairly quickly. Tomorrow there will be a posted material, and your assignments this week are quite simple. They are video games. Okay, now granted, they're educational video games, but they're video games nonetheless. I'm going to give you about 5 video games to choose from. You're going to choose one per day for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So you're going to play 3 different video games. Now, of course, you can knock them all out tomorrow and get them out of the way and just be done with it. Or you can do, like I said, one per day throughout the week just to get it done. And there will be an assignment associated with that as well. So you're going to play video games associated with what we've already gone over with the Constitution. And then, of course, over the legislative branch as well. So those activities will be posted tomorrow. They are all through a website called iCivics. We'll be coming back to iCivics quite regularly. They have some pretty decent educational materials and video games with which to use. So that'll be the plan for the rest of this week. And then next week, we'll go back to kind of what I had been doing, where I'll post a video to kind of explain what the assignments are for a week. And then there'll be some obviously videos there to help you with instruction and some activities to use to kind of further your knowledge in the legislative branch, which is what we're doing before winter break. If you have any questions, you can hang back. Otherwise, you are free to go to your sixth bell. Have a great day. Stay safe. Stay healthy.